Hi, today in Archaeonomy I'm once more diving into the grey literature, unpublished reports that can be easily overlooked. My example is not from here in New Zealand this time. Today I pulled a collection of volumes from the Historic England website. In this case, reports written about one of the world's most well-known archaeological sites, Stonehenge. These reports have been used to help build up the body of information about the site. If the similar resources held about New Zealand sites were tapped in such a way, maybe the archaeology of New Zealand would be appreciated by a wider audience. Stonehenge really needs no introduction. But anyway, it's a prehistoric stone circle near the village of Amesbury. It's an extremely interesting area full of amazing sights. Old Sarum is just 9 kilometres to the south, and I highly recommend Sargon's video on Old Sarum in his Ancient Recitations channel. My favourite prehistoric stone circle, Avebury, is 20 kilometres north of Stonehenge, a fascinating place with a great museum, and a pub, the Red Lion, in the middle of it. What's not to love? On a personal note, it can be frustrating being so far from Britain. It would be lovely to be able to go back to these places and drink in the history again. The earliest report I have here is entitled Stonehenge, 20th Century Excavations Project Report on the Geophysical Surveys 1993-94 by Andrew Payne. It presents the results of an intensive geophysical survey of the Stonehenge Triangle and parts of the avenue to the northeast that was surveyed in 1990. The entire triangle and section of avenue was surveyed using a flux gate gradiometer, and the henge itself was surveyed in detail using a resistivity meter. The magnetometer survey of the henge proved less than useful, as there was enormous magnetic disturbance in the area. That being said, the infilled ditch with its internal bank and external counterscarp that encircles the stones showed up clearly. And it showed variation where that ditch had been emptied and refilled during the 1920s excavations by Colonel Hawley. 20th century features relating to the caretakers' cottages in the east and the old Royal Flying Corps airfield to the southwest showed up clearly in the survey. A long linear feature to the northeast is clearly visible. It's a stockaded ditch feature first encountered in 1967, part of a late Bronze Age field system. That's also visible in the 1990 survey of the avenue. The ring ditches of a number of round barrows show up clearly, and one barrow that was excavated without finding anything does not appear on the survey at all, raising the likelihood it's not a barrow at all. The resistivity survey of the henge itself provided detailed information on features not visible on the surface. The current and past tracks to visit the site are visible. The circular earthworks of the henge show up clearly, forming a continuous circle only broken by the entrance to the avenue in the northeast. The causeway crossing the ditch to the south does not appear, likely due to the fact that the area had been disturbed by the previous archaeological investigations. 3 anomalies that may be buried outlying stones were detected that warranted further investigation. Some of the assumed circle of 50 Aubrey holes were found. These holes are 1 metre in diameter and possibly held timbers or stones, each containing a human burial, and relate to the earliest phase of the henge's construction around 3000 BC. The 2 barrows, which is a misnomer because they didn't contain burials, supported standing stones. They showed up a bit. The visitor path covers half of the northern one, and the southern one's hard to see due to disturbance resulting from past excavation. The Y and Z holes, extra concentric rings of holes around the main structure, excavated as part of the last phase of construction, around 1600 BC, show up clearly in places. Within the monument itself, the survey results get very messy and not very helpful. But there's potential for buried stones and holes from missing stones there. This report provided a fascinating, non-destructive look at the features of Stonehenge, and is an excellent example of geophysical surveying at its best. The next report, entitled Stonehenge, Wiltshire, Assessment of Human Remains from the Stonehenge Landscape 3700 to 1600 BC, by Stephanie Vincent and Simon Mays, is a 2010 study of the many human remains found around Stonehenge, restricted to those contemporary with the time period of construction and development of the site. The way the site has been excavated piecemeal by many scholars over hundreds of years has resulted in material information about the site being scattered amongst many museums and collections. This study was an effort to compile information about all the human remains found and held by the different institutions into a single document, an annotated bibliography of sorts. They looked at 116 articulated skeletons, 18 boxes of disarticulated remains, and 123 cremations, noting an additional 103 cremations that they excluded. The results are tables acting as a bibliography for scholars wanting to source specific information on any particular burial. Okay, next we have Stonehenge World Heritage Site Landscape Project, Stonehenge Amesbury, Wiltshire Archaeological Survey Report by David Field and Trevor Pearson. It's a 2010 study of Stonehenge looking at a variety of aspects. It's a study of the earthworks of the enclosure using a fine-grained topographic survey and LiDAR data to build a detailed surface model. Shallow surface depressions no more than 10 centimetres deep were noted, corresponding with the Y and Z holes, as well as a subtle earthwork bank between the rows, and between the Z holes and the stone circle. The earthwork remnants of the south and north Barrows are also discussed, along with the main enclosure and the avenue. Given the vast levels of disturbance in these areas, I'm not sure of the value of this particular part of the project. Historic aerial photographs were consulted as part of this study. The 1906 top-down photographs taken from a Royal Engineers balloon shows the henge during a drought. The differential grass growth clearly defines the enclosure ditch and bank. Others taken during the 1920s show the archaeological excavations going on at the time. A geological study looks at the stones themselves, the sarsen stones likely being local in origin, while the blue stones have had to come from further away, probably a source in Wales, either by human endeavour or glacial forces. It also discusses the methods required to shape and dress the sarsen stone. The report goes on to discuss the long history of people studying Stonehenge, going back as far as 1130 AD. Inigo Jones's work, published posthumously in 1655, is interesting, as it includes a plan of how the ruin appeared in 1620. He also argued that the Druids had not built it, and addressed and debunked the arguments that Merlin had brought the stones from Ireland. He concluded that the Romans must have built it. Charlton in 1663 argued that it was built by the Danes, and that it was ruined as a result of locals ripping it to pieces for building stone. Stukely in 1740 argued that the Romans were responsible for destroying it, not building it, and taking stones away to construct bridges over the Avon. Certainly considerable amounts of Roman artefacts were found at the site. The account goes on, bringing us right through to the present day, and it's a brilliant summary of the scholarship of Stonehenge. The study suggests that the North Barrow predates the earthwork enclosure, otherwise considered the earliest component of the site, and this report is an excellent overall discussion of the history of the site. The next report, also from 2010, is entitled Stonehenge World Heritage Site Landscape Project, Wilsford Barrows by Mark Bowden. It's a study of a group of barrows to the south of Stonehenge, but still within the UNESCO Stonehenge World Heritage Site. There have been no modern excavations of the barrows. They were excavated in the 19th century and earlier. The author goes on to describe each of the barrows one by one, the ones in the woodland having survived in a much better condition than the ones under cultivation. Where information exists on the contents of each barrow, they're presented, and from the various Stone and Bronze Age artefacts found, the barrows can be divided into three phases. Barrows 62 and 70 and maybe 67 appear to be Beaker period, 2450 to 1950 BC. 58, 65, 72, 60, maybe 64 and 71 are early Bronze Age 1. 1950 to 1700 BC, and parts of Barrows 60, 65 and 70 date to the early Bronze Age 2 period, 1750 to 1500 BC, making the barrows all contemporary with Stonehenge. Entitled Stonehenge World Heritage Site Landscape Project Level 1 Field Investigations by Sharon Bishop, and written in 2011, the next report is an archaeological assessment of a number of locations around the World Heritage Site, including more round barrows at Winterbourne Stoke Down, West Amesbury Down, and the Fargo Military Storage Platform, which surprisingly, part of one barrow, Darrington 1, survived the construction of an earthwork blast pen on top of it. A series of old field system boundaries survive in the woodland to the south of this, the Fargo Plantation North. And the study also surveyed the site of Darrington Walls Henge, and the features around Woodhenge. 20th century heritage was not left out, as the report also looks at historic sections of Lark Hill Aerodrome, sections of military railway as well as military slip trenches that were identified in the Fargo Plantation. The next report is entitled Stonehenge Southern WHS Project, Vespasian's Camp, Amesbury, Wiltshire, Analytical Earthwork Survey by Mark Bowden. It's an archaeological assessment of an Iron Age hill fort east of Stonehenge that contained 2 Bronze Age barrows, both of which were dug out in the 18th century. It was erroneously believed to be a Roman fortress until the 19th century, and while no one has proven that Vespasian didn't camp there, the Romans did not construct its earthworks. It has been heavily disturbed by medieval farming and 18th century landscaping, and now has Stonehenge Road cutting through it and a row of houses constructed on its southern side. Next we have Stonehenge Laser Scan, Archaeological Analysis Report by Marcus Abbott and Hugo Anderson Wymark. I'm friends with an archaeologist here in New Zealand who does this sort of work, both here and overseas. His channel's featured on my front page, along with ancient recitations. This project used 0.5mm resolution laser scanning, combined with photogrammetry, to create incredibly detailed surface models of the stones at Stonehenge. The digital models allow fine-grained analysis of the stones, revealing 722 previously unrecorded surface features, such as tool marks from stoneworking, prehistoric carvings, graffiti, weathering, and evidence of past conservation work. The digital models could be manipulated by shining light sources on them at unusual angles, revealing hitherto unseen features in the shadows, such as whole panels of rock art like this example from Stone 4. A technique called luminance lensing was developed that reveals the rock art even clearer. Here's the same stone viewed with luminance lensing. This has allowed the team to discover a huge quantity of carvings that simply couldn't be seen before. The laser scan data has also proved that significant parts of the fallen stones are missing, clearly broken sections that show that the stones were being quarried for reuse elsewhere. This study is a brilliant example of how new technology can extract information from a site, even one as heavily analysed as Stonehenge has been. The last report I'll look at is entitled Stonehenge World Heritage Site Landscape Project Restoring Stonehenge, 1881 to 1939, by Martin Barber. This is a really interesting study. It's essentially looking at how much the site has been monkeyed around with, in the interest of stabilising it and making it more attractive to tourists. Starting with the collection of aerial photos, the author compares the Stonehenge of today to how it appeared at the turn of the century. Between 1901 and 1964, 13 of the 17 sarsens in the outer circle have either been straightened or re-erected after they had fallen, and most of them are now set in concrete. The 8 standing inner horseshoe of sarsens have had 4 of their numbers straightened, 2 re-erected, and 6 of the 8 are concreted in. 2 of the blue stones have been concreted, and 7 others moved or adjusted. The widespread excavations of the site mean that much of the enclosure ditch was excavated out in the 1920s, and deliberately not backfilled to improve its visibility to tourists. Do I think this high level of intervention in the site is bad? Not necessarily. If it hadn't been done, Stonehenge would appear to be nothing more than a pile of overgrown, big rocks in a field, and the 1906 aerial photos show that the few standing stones at the time required timber supports to keep them up then. This has just been a tiny sliver of the documentation that's been produced regarding Stonehenge, grey, academic and otherwise. Reading through it has helped me get a better appreciation of the site and the wider landscape. As I have to admit, every time I've been there I was underwhelmed, and thought the site overhyped. But if I were to return there in the future, I would have a better appreciation of it, and not limit myself to just the stone circle itself, but check out some of the Barrows, Vespasian's camp and Woodhenge. Try to visualise the whole landscape, although I'd probably find my way back to the pub in Avebury eventually. Britain is a fascinating country, full of amazing historic sites, and they appreciate them there so much more than Kiwis appreciate theirs. Here in New Zealand, most of the knowledge about our historic places is sealed up in our grey literature. Free to all, but known to only a few. This has been a small sample of British grey literature. Next time I should come back to New Zealand and hit up the digital library again. Thanks for watching, and please like, comment and subscribe. Cheers!